Hello, teachers, educators, wherever you are in this special time, let's say. Anyway, I'm Saeed Ali Mohammdi. My topic is incorporation of learner's first language, literature in ELT. Uh, literature has a history as long as human history. Before invention of alphabet, men told the stories orally, which are called oral traditions. The oldest written form of literature, which is remaining in today's world, is Gilgamesh. It goes back to nearly 3,500 years ago. The story of eternity in Sumer, ancient Sumer in Iraq. Literary texts were, to some extent, the Lingua Franca. In the old ages, learning a language was as a lingua franca, the royal courts, or among the literate, knowledgeable, and scholars as a scientific language, or at churches as a religious language, such as Greek and Latin in Europe, and Arabic in Muslim world. The Greek language was the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean at the time. The Bible was translated into Latin in late antiquity because at that time Latin was the common tongue of the Western Roman Empire. Latin was still widely used as the language of the educated until as recently as the 17th century. Right now, when you talk about studying Arabic language or Arabic course at universities in Iran, it is called Adabiyatul Arab, which means Arabic literature. Therefore, you cannot separate Arabic from literature or literature from Arabic, and the same is true for Latin, Greek, and Greek in 18th and 19th century. When talking about learning a language in those days, it meant studying high and rich sources to learn language. And the reason might be the only accessible sources and materials in that language at that time. But in modern world and the spread of communications and discoveries in Europe and Asia, a necessity of communication, there needed a new approach to language learning. From the 18th century to the 20th century, language learning began with grammar translation method, which was based on literary texts. In those days, the study of language meant the study of literature. Then, by the emergence of direct method, audiolingualism, literature was taken out of the realm of language teaching. Despite the benefits of using literature in the classroom, literature's importance was faded as linguistics has become the center of language programs. This continued until the rise of communicative language teaching in the 1970s and 1980s, using authentic text, reopened the way for literature. In a student's belief, literature is nothing but obscure poems or classic literature like masterpieces by Shakespeare, Dickens, Jane Austen, T.S. Eliot, and learners were mostly scholarly elites. As a matter of fact, literature with L in capital belongs to classics, and those that are in small letter are stories, um, non-classic folk tales, biographies, autobiography. So these two difference between L literature by L in capital and L with a small lowercase. Let's have a review on educators' point of view on literature in ELT. It helps learners to enrich receptive vocabulary and provides a context which lexical or syntactical are more memorable. There are three main reasons for using literature: linguistic, methodological, and motivational. Also, there is a secret formula in literature, and literature reaches the parts of a person's feelings, dreams, fantasies, and experience that other texts can't reach. Literature may increase learners' understanding and tolerance for cultural differences. Literary language may be said superior to spoken language because it is more elaborate. There have been pros and cons of literature in ELT, but advantages often outweigh the disadvantages. Some say that literary texts are not informative in the realm and in the time of communication, technology. What's the usage of it? Or they are not referential. But here it says it outweighed the disadvantages. It is very interesting. Literature evokes feelings through words, pulls learners out of degraded grammatical forms, and helps them to communicate in a way that attracts language learning. This is something that I can say a common point or a key point in all scholars, those who believe in incorporation of literature in in language teaching. That is the case of motivation. Two kinds of motivation: intrinsic motivation, personal enjoyment, interest, or pleasure. Extrinsic: achieve an instrumental result, such as earning a reward or avoiding a punishment. Altogether, intrinsic motivation is more desirable and results in better learning outcomes than extrinsic motivation does. Something that pushes the students toward reading, to be eager, and do not leave language learning anytime, anywhere. That is something belongs to intrinsic. Now, what text should be? There are some questions. What is literature? What therefore should be selected as basis for teaching literature, and why? What is the rate of units with literature? What is the distribution of types of literature? Shorter story, novel, play, poem, autobiography, biography. How should it be taught, and what is its overall place internationally in language teaching? Some researchers, I've chose them for this research, for this, let's say, workshop, and some answers are here, or let's say they work on them. Let's review by Nazifa Aydinoglu. That in the article, use of literature in language teaching course books. These four scholars work on incorporation of literature in ELT. Nazifer says and showed the course books published in the first decade of the second millennium, there is a tendency to integrate literature teaching mainly in the form of reference to increase learners' awareness about literature. Odidia Roka Erkaya says in the article, benefits of using short stories in the EFL contexts says that integrating short stories into the curriculum will help EFL students to become well-rounded professionals and human beings, since short stories teach more than the skills necessary for survival in the target language. Short stories teach literary, cultural, and higher order thinking benefits. The genre that most of the students are more interested in it, short story, especially for the beginners. Ildiria Chevik, advantage of using translated stories from students' native language to teach EFL. Actually, this is the same maybe topic that I am presenting as a workshop. Said that students' motivation to read will be enhanced due to the familiarity with the culture. Also, beginning students will not worry about getting acquainted with a different culture. Also, intermediate advanced students will explore cultural aspects of stories without fear of criticizing them openly. And the last, he points, instructors will be able to concentrate on vocabulary already known in the first language. Holden Burrell, in an overview of culture to teaching through using folk literature, says that a sample case of Nasreddin Hoja by him, students' motivation can be increased with the familiarity of the culture. Familiar context may provide easiness in the vocabulary enrichment. The tales of Nasreddin Hoja are great in number, which can be used by Turkish and non-Turkish students as well at all levels of language learning. I will talk about it later. About Nasreddin, I have a picture of it as well. Let's talk about three kinds of literature that are in English but different. Original in English, it's very obvious, there are lots of, as I mentioned, like classic, like Shakespeare, writers in Britain, America, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada. They are English, actually natives. They made masterpieces. That's something we know as literature, English literature. We can use it in ELT. But there are some countries they were someday colonized, like India, Sri Lanka, and they are Eurocentric, but they write in English, like some part of Africa. You can find them, but the theme, the events, maybe they are not in an English country, speaking country. We can use them as well. But to the point, there are some stories, actually, there are lots of potentiality that we have got numerous of them. Actually, it is worldwide. We can translate them, we can simplify, and should be authentic as well. Actually, there are some stories that we know them already, and they were. Uh, I chose them from my region. I mean, the place that I live in Iran, like Arabian Nights, Nasruddin. We've got stories. These are actually the events are in the Middle East. We cannot say they're Arabic, not only Persian, Arabic, Syrian, I don't know. In the Middle East, on Nasruddin, we've got stories, anecdotes by him. So there are stories that we already know. As I mentioned in the article, this character, funny, humorous, very happy ending, interesting. So it's very well known in the region. And also Aladdin, that is part from a story from Arabian Nights. It is worldwide story. We know all of the. I mean, a person who's American, Japanese know this because Walt Disney, Hollywood has um, made films, cartoons. So we already know this, and also the Four Thieves, cartoons and let's say movies. But there are some stories that are less known. So I say I name some of the stories in my culture, my country. Isfahan is half the world. Right? Sayyid Muhammad Ali Jamalzadeh. These are stories from Iran. They are translated into Farsi English, authentic, sometimes simplified for beginners. This is a story, The Little Blackfish by Samad Rangi. That's a nice story, very funny, especially for beginners. And the previous one, maybe we can say it's better for intermediate levels. But this one, surely for beginners, that's fantastic. My Mother's Persian stories by Saeed Shammas and Shawnee Shammas. These are folk tales, a great combination that especially the translation, that's perfect. By both of them actually, Shawnee, his wife, a native, and Said himself was living in Canada for over 4 decades. In case of um, our experience in Thailand and Southeast Asia stories, I chose a story of a rice bird, and then I asked my students to draw the picture of it. They were very, they were interested in it. They were familiar with this story, and they could draw it easily. They learned the vocabulary faster, and they were they didn't want to leave the story. A story is like this: a rice bird was playing. A girl was actually playing around the rice basket. Her mother says, "Do not touch it." But when she was playing, she fell down in the basket, and she became like a rice bird. Actually, that's a funny story and folk tale. So rice has meaning in Southeast Asia. So not like Aladdin, which is something in Middle East. In the Middle East, the theme. So the students were very happy, and my students draw this for me. To the point of the less known stories, I chose a story from Arabian Nights the story of a fisher, a rope maker, how he could he got rich, you know, in the story of Middle Eastern actually theme. I chose. I actually provided some tasks and exercises, and also I asked my brother, who's an illustrator, to draw a picture of the story, the theme, the text, new words, comprehension exercises, true or false, reading comprehension. See that's it can be, of course. I asked my trainers at the college that I passed, that I took a teaching course in Thailand, to have a review of it actually. And this can be like a gathering of stories, like 20, 15. Okay, so it can be the beginning of new and less known stories. Students will be very motivated, as I experienced in Thailand. Some stories that the themes were the blind to Southeast Asia. So this is like an introduction, and something like Nasreddin Hoca in Turkish, by Turkish scholars that I reviewed. There are lots of and plenty of potentialities. Actually, this is let's say multicultural, let's say comparative literature as well, that enrich and gives value to concepts of materials. But in case of ELT, they shouldn't be ignored. Why? Because we are living in a worldwide country. English is not just an English country language, but a worldwide and universal language. So to we need the translation, authentic translation of new concepts, new stories, and we should add to this. I mean, to the concept of, let's say, literature of the world. I hope this would be a door to the hidden heritage of literature. I conclude by this, by Nazifa's statement. It needs more research and survey in case of selection of texts and tasks, and many attempts are needed to find, refine, and effective literary texts in LT course books. And I end my statement by Malay's article. It says, the title of the article is Literature in the Language Classroom. Perhaps the growing interest in literature is one manifestation of the spread of parallel notions such as emotional intelligence. Thank you very much. I hope it would be useful for you and you enjoyed. Thank you. I'm sorry for the inconvenience and low quality of my video. Thank you very much.